interesting topic, Emotet. Maybe you've heard about it. If not, you will, but it has been around for a long time, and Luca is going to present some interesting things about it.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Luca Nagy. I'm from Sophos Labs, from Budapest. I'm working as a threat researcher since I finished my studies last year. And now I would like to give you an insight into a Trojan family, which is one of the most destructive and prevalent malware presented in the last couple of some years. In the year of 2013, several new banking malware appeared. Their rise continued in the year of 2014, when Emotet, a member of the Feodo Trojan family, first appeared. The first sample we detected popped up in May, and the intention of that sample was completely different from the current ones, as the earlier samples were designed to steal bank account details. That's why they spread the word as banking Trojans. These variants were delivered by spam campaigns targeting German and Austrian banks. So these samples downloaded a configuration file, including the targeted banks to monitor, and these downloaded a DLL, which was injected into sensitive processes in order to hook some APIs and intercept the outgoing network traffic. Later that year, in November, a new version appeared, and it was improved to a modular structure. So it had a banking module, which was developed to steal money automatically from the victim's bank account, and it had a Spambot module, which could log into email services with stolen credentials and send out several spam messages. This variant still focused on a small number of German and Austrian banks. But later, in January, a new version appeared, and it targeted Swiss banks. This variant focused on making the Trojan less visible, so it started using some anti-VN techniques, and the strings were encrypted in the binaries. But was most interesting that it started to apply a social engineering tricks in order to evade two-factor authentication, because it could appear a fake message on the target website, which warned the victim to a new security system and to a test transaction which had to be done, and the user had to enter the real SMS or cheap transaction authentication number. As time went by, we haven't seen any significant campaign, only some occasional attack with data phishing messages which had PDF documents. However, at the end of 2016, we realized that Emotet was delivered by Rig Exploit Kit. After that long break, Emotet was back in full force and targeted UK victims. So we have seen several, besides the data phishing, we have seen O2 Telecom, Vodafone spam messages with JavaScript droppers. What was very unusual for this type of malware, that this variant left its banking module and got other capabilities to spreading through the local network by enumerating SME and brute forcing the credentials. And last but not least, what was the most interesting, that this variant started to act as a loader for other threats. Right after conquering the UK, it arrived to the US. So we have seen Word documents that had DB macro codes and that launched the PowerShell script, which was actually the downloader. And at that point, we see that our binary was auto-updated with high frequency, and it started dropping other Trojans. In October, a new module appeared, and it harvested the email contents, not only the email contact list, but the email contents as well. And in spring of this year, we realized and we found those previously stolen email conversation chains in Emotet spam campaigns. In early June, the server stopped responding to infected computers, and during the summer, it was unclear whether they retired or just started working on new features again. But in August, some of the servers started working, and the frequency of auto-updating the binary was increased. And in the middle of September, these binaries were delivered with heavy spam campaigns, which made Emotet back into the spotlight again. I would like to demonstrate how frequently the new binaries and downloaders appear because these were presented in mass numbers. So this is a 3 months observations right before they went on a break, but this frequency shows similar values right now. So on average, around 70 new binaries and 1,700 new downloaders appeared every day in order to stay ahead of signature-based detections. An Emotet infection begins with a spam campaign. So a victim receives a message that claims to be an invoice of a bank or telecommunication company, even a Snowden book offer, what we have seen starting 2 weeks ago. But these emails has a malicious link leading the victims to the downloader, or these downloaders can be as an attachment as well. So we have seen Word documents, PDF, JavaScript. What is what we have seen password-protected zip files as the attachment. But the most evolved spamming method when these malicious objects are inserted into an email conversation thread. And as I have mentioned, it happened sometime after when the email harvesting module came into being and harvested the email contents as well. And in many cases, we observed that this domain name of that malicious link in the fake reply is the same, exactly the same as the email domain of that current sender. And you can see a typical execution method when this link leads to a zip file that has a Word document, and that Word document tries to trick the victim to enable the macro codes. These macro codes are heavily obfuscated with full of junks and garbage, but at the end it will result in a PowerShell script, which is actually the downloader. The binary discovers the environment it is running on. So the earliest samples contain the hard-coded hash list of the VM-related process names. And these were compared with the running processes. And in the case they detected the VM, they had a second set of fake IP lists in order to connect to them unsuccessfully and mislead the analyst. Besides, some VM and antivirus-related files and folders were detected, but some variants were capable to detect whether they run on a sandbox environment, so they could detect the most frequently used sandbox-related files combined with usernames, with the night BIOS name, and with permissions, for instance. The recent sample sends the whole process list to the server, so this VM checking takes place on that server side, and in the case the VM is detected, the bot ID or our public IP is blocked. As the modular structure appeared in Emotet, the process injection started to be used only by the downloaded modules. So for instance, the wrapper modules, which decodes its embedded executable and inject them into another process. And what caught my attention that some of these wrapper modules use a technique in order to switch to 64-bit code execution. And the reason of that was some of these executables embedded in these wrappers use the Outlook messaging API, and in order to harvest some information from Outlook. And the Outlook messaging API's methods and function calls will fail in the case of the installed version of the Outlook is 64-bit, and the messaging API using application is 32-bit process. So these wrappers has a 64-bit version of these executables, and in order to avoid these executables being written to the disk, they rather put more effort to inject them into a 64-bit process, as these wrappers has to switch to 64-bit code execution in order to manage this injection. So in the picture, you can see a code snippet from these wrapper parts. And in order to access the different code execution is possible from different code segments. So the segment selector has to be modified. That's why you can see the push 33, which is the segment selector of the 64-bit code execution. So the file return instruction can specify even the code segments as well. So from the yellow addresses on the left side, those are in fact 64-bit instructions and can be seen correctly in a 64-bit disassembler. And the recent malware family started use the technique again because, as you can see, this can be used as an anti-analysis technique, as the most debugger disassembler cannot handle this switch. But it can be also used to evade some hooking-based sandbox or AV products, because those may hook only the 32-bit version of the NTDLL for WOV64 processes. I would like to mention a custom packer, which I was struggling with a lot, because it was different than the other packers used by Emotet. It could make the flow tracking much more difficult. It was a 2-layer packer, and the second layer wrote the small code chunks into different memory blocks, so that payload couldn't be observed as a whole, but without putting some effort to it. And you can see these CC bytes in the picture, which refer to these payload chunks in different memory blocks, because those replace the real opcodes. And the jump instructions ensure the proper execution between the blocks. Sorry. Okay. The main functionalities of the binary are organized into a big switch statement. So this core code is not modified frequently in the case of Emotet. What has been changing along the time is that timing mechanism, which calls this switch statement periodically. So some variants register a hidden window with a callback function and set a timer for it. Others create a queue for timers that enable a callback function pointing to the switch statement. Or recent samples waits until a specified event or timeout. And these timeouts are modified in different branches in order to make the periods random. There is always 0 keys, which is the persistent process creator block. It will generate a file name to its persistent process, which is always the same on that same machine from the same string list, because this file name generation algorithm uses the volume serial number of the hard drive, which is always identical on the same machine. And it, in this branch, it will copies a description of another legit service to its newly created service in order to look more legit. And the first case is an initialization block, as it has to initialize the cryptographic key to the network communication. And Emotet pays attention to encrypt their communication properly, so it has an embedded RSA public key, and it will generate an EES key here. The second case is the main block. This block will run in every period, and in every period it will collect the information, it will compress them and encrypt them and send to the C2 server, and this block also handles the response from the server. The C2 server communication based on Google Protocol buffers. So you can see a serialized protocol buffer message here in its binary format right before it's compressed with zlib and encrypted. So these are the sent information like the process list, the some OS information, the CRC checksum of the sample, the bot ID, which is made up of a computer name and serial number, and these are the downloaded modules IDs as well. The sent payload is made up of the message, which is encrypted by the EES key, and there is an SRJ1 hash, which is generated every time for validating the messages, and there is the EES key, which is encrypted by the RSA public key. So it means if we intercept this packet, in order to decrypt it, we should know the RSA private key or the EES secret key, which is not possible. And the response won't contain the EES secret key, as it's not necessary to send back to the client as the client generated it, and it will contain the digital signature of that message. So it means in order to accept message from the server side, that message has to be signed by the private key of that RSA keeper. So here you can see the IP addresses extracted from the binaries collected in the beginning of this year. And these IP addresses locations based on mostly in US, Canada, but in Europe, in UK, Belgium, France, Germany as well. And if we observe these locations, these are the most targeted countries by Emotet as well. And it can be observed by the spam campaigns and from our detections as well. So those are mostly located in here as well. And this similarity wouldn't be by chance if we suppose that these these victims from these targeted countries can be the IP addresses hard-coded in the binary, which the binary connects to in order to reach the C2 servers. So it suggested us that these IP addresses are the infected victims and function as an additional layer between the real C2 servers. But besides, there can be, and probably there are other layers as well between the real C2 servers and the clients. Before I talk about the downloaded modules, I would like to mention that it's very often the case that the response contains only an updated version of the binary. As the CRC checksum of that sample is sent to the C2 server, that server makes a simple decision whether to replace that binary or not. But let's assume that we have the latest binary which is communicating with the server, and our bot ID public IP is not blocked as the VM is not detected. Then the list of the latest modules are downloaded. And these can be coupled with additional malware as well. But these modules are DLS, very similar in structures. And I would divide it into two groups because half of the modules aim at decoding the embedded executable and inject them into another process. And these executables can be third-party tools like Nearsoft tools, but can be own homebrew proprietary executables as well. These executables injected into the arch.exe, in the case of the installed version of Outlook, is 64-bit, and the wrapper parts of this will use the Heaven's Gate to switch to 64-bit code execution. But in every other case, it will inject into a new instance of itself, which is a little bit weird, but why not into another legit process? But my thought would be maybe because these executables can be like Nearsoft tools, which aren't relocatables, and those may load into a reserved memory address in the case of picking up a random process from the system. But the Emotet pay attention to leave those addresses available. There are two Nearsoft executables used by Emotet, like the web browser Posse, which is a password recovery tool, which scans the browsers in order to find the saved passwords. And the mail Posse, which is the same, so it's a password recovery tool with the difference of it scans the email clients. And the most important email settings can be extracted with it. And the results of this module will be used by the Spambot module because these will be the hijacked accounts. There are two proprietary executables appeared last year with the intention of harvesting the email contact list and the email contents as well. So this uses the Outlook messaging APIs, you can see the email contact extractor results, and these addresses are sorted descending by how often they occur in the email conversations, and the recipients from one emails are located next to each other in these 10 files. And the email content harvest then can harvest all the emails back to 180 days with the subject and the body and the recipients as well. As I have mentioned, there is another group of the downloaded modules which don't have any embedded executable to inject them. They had only their own homebrew code, which is run on the main process memory. And as opposed to the other modules, what I have explained so far, and those were purposed to information harvesting, this main purpose is the spreading. So like the network spreading module, which scans the network in order to find network resources, and it will try to establish a null session connection to that IPC share of that victim. And this null session connection doesn't allow for access to that victim's machine, but it can enable the enumeration and extracting of information from that account. And those accounts can be brute forced by a hard-coded password list, which is expanded through the years. So it's right now 10,000 passwords around in this module, but when this module first appeared, it was only 300 passwords embedded in it. And after, it will gain persistence on that victim's machine by the mean of it will create a service from a copy of itself. The next module uses the UPnP library in order to set a port forwarding on that gateway router. And the port forwarding is necessary in the case of setting up a proxy server on that victim machine. This module firstly will create a simple server to answer to the incoming messages in order to verify the port forwarding from outside of the local network. And in order to manage this, it will bypass some file rules, and it will send information to the server related to this success of these settings in order to make the decision easier to the server whether setting up a proxy server on that victim's machine. And you can see the port numbers which are set by this module. And this was what firstly caught my attention when I analyzed this module. And this led to figure out the intention of this module, because these port numbers are exactly the same as the port numbers belonging to the IP addresses hard-coded in the binaries, which the binaries connects. So it again suggested me that these IP addresses are the infected victims and act as a proxy server. The next module is the Spambot module, which firstly, before start communicating with this server, in order to ask every information to these spam messages, it will check whether that IP address of that victim's machine can be found on online spam backlist. So it will send DNS queries to the most frequently used online spam blacklist. And in the case it's not found there, it will start communicating and ask every piece of information which are highlighted here in the dark blue. And these information were collected by the other modules, but there is not any connection between the connection and between the modules on a particular machine. Rather, every module sends the information to the server, and another bot module will receive the previously collected information from other bots. So, for instance, it will receive the recipients, it will receive the account settings, which was collected by Posse, for instance, and the credentials, server settings, and it will also receive the templates. The templates can be a simple generic template, but can be an email conversation thread as well. As I have mentioned, Emotet can act as a loader for other threats. So it can deliver banking trojans, but secondly, it can contribute to ransomware infections as well. So we have seen several signs for Ryuk ransomware encrypted unprotected servers after TrickBot were dropped by Emotet, and TrickBot can bypass security products and can perform reconnaissance on that network. And TrickBot with Emotet seems to be a successful combination in increasing the mass distribution, because Emotet is effective with spreading through the wide area network, while TrickBot has other capabilities spreading on the local network and in lateral movements. Ryuk ransomware focus on only high volume profile companies which can explored and can be selected with the support of Emotet and TrickBot capabilities. The other frequently seen attack chain is made up of a DryDex, which is dropped by Emotet, and after a bit paymer ransomware encrypts the machines. In the case of the Megacortex ransomware, we also see correlation between the Emotet and Megacortex attack, but we cannot say for sure that it was aided by Emotet. Let me summarize the effect and the results of Emotet infections since the moment of a user is infected by a sample. So the information belonging to the user, to the operating system, and the machines are stolen. Not to mention the saved credentials from the browsers. So it means maybe the email credentials, maybe the WordPress site credentials are stolen and can be hijacked and reused by other Emotet activities as well. That victim's machine will provide spreading capabilities on that local network by brute forcing the credentials. And as the email address books are stolen, it means that other bots receive those email addresses, and the acquaintances of that victims will receive a spam message in the name of that victim with containing the Emotet downloader. As the email account settings are stolen, that means other bots receive those credentials and account settings and will be hijacked and reused to spam several spam messages. As the email conversation threads are stolen, that means the acquaintances of that victims will receive a fake reply to that previously stolen email conversations. And by applying that trick, what I have mentioned at the beginning, when this domain name of that URL is exactly the same as the email domain of the current sender, it's very effective. That victim's machine will be capable to send out several spam messages independently from any other module and independently from any local information. Additionally, that machine can act as a proxy server and contribute to hiding the real C2 servers. And besides all these, that user can become easily a victim for other threats as well. And concluding these functions, we can see that the spreading capabilities are dominant and well developed in the case of Emotet and can support effectively the business model of Emotet as a malware delivery service. And due to this, we have seen several Emotet spam messages, and the Emotet spam messages made up for the biggest rates of daily spam messages. So, sorry. As I have mentioned, Emotet has been on a long break, and maybe for some time we thought they really retired for good, but each time we have seen that each time they went on a break, they made quite the entrance afterwards they came back. So in my opinion, the most likely scenario would be that they will still keep putting effort to the mass distribution, and as they already started it again, and will keep improving their spreading capabilities. However, it's also a possible case, although much less probable, that maybe they will change their shape of their attack again, as they did 2 years ago when they left their banking module and rather started drop other Trojans. Thank you very much.